that for a computer scientist, attending a talk by Christos is like, well, imagine if you were a film student and you attended a talk by Steven Spielberg. Or imagine if you were a political science student and you attended a talk by the president of by the former president of the United States, Barack Obama. So there are probably a lot of undergrads in the room. And I remember being an undergrad, your impression of what a famous senior computer scientist came from was looking at your textbooks. So Christos does not disappoint in this regard. So as an instructor of algorithms at the moment, one of the textbooks that we use is this book by Dasgupta, Papadimitriou, and Vazirani. And when I was an undergrad, I studied computational complexity, again using the book by Christos. And when I was a grad student, I was very interested in combinatorial optimization, and I studied that from this book, also by Christos. So these are books that I've spent many, many hours studying. And Christos has also written many other books, some of which I didn't get around to reading, including these three, one of which is a novel, Turing, and one of which is a graphic novel, Logicomics, which is a lot of fun. I encourage you to take a look at that. And another way in which Christos stood out in my mind as a young student was that, well, this was back in the era where it was quite rare for computer scientists to be billionaires, but still in that time, Christos managed to publish a paper with one of the original computer science billionaires, Bill Gates. So he's well known for that as well. But as I became a researcher and a graduate student, I learned more about what it means to be an influential computer scientist, an influential researcher. I learned that it means about asking the big questions in any field of study and writing papers that influence people's thoughts and thereby change the direction of the field. So Christos has contributed seminal works to many, many areas of computer science, including database theory, information retrieval, computational complexity, combinatorial optimization, and he basically single-handedly launched the computational science, computer science study of game theory. And now that field has really blossomed, and we have two professors in this department working just in that area. And he has also done celebrated work studying the complexity of fixed-point theorems and Nash equilibria, local search, and that's work that I found very exciting. And more recently, he has been one of the leaders in the viewpoint that computer science can act as a lens on the sciences. And following that intellectual path, he has recently been studying a computational view of evolution and also, as we will hear about today, a computational view on the brain. Christos has won numerous awards, but I won't list them here because there are too many of them, and they're basically corollaries of all the fantastic research he has done throughout his career. So please join me in giving the most enthusiastic welcome to Christos Papadimitriou.
Thank you so much, Nick, for this lovely introduction. And thank you very much for coming here. It's a great pleasure to finally come to UBC and address you. And I'll tell you about myself, a computer scientist thinking about the brain. It's the obvious question is, why would the computer scientist think about the brain? Okay, so I think the answer is simple, but the story is sort of long. Let's start here. In the beginning, computer scientists were thinking about the computer. For the younger people in the audience, it may be a little hard to believe that computer scientists were so interested in the computer for so long, okay? But we were, okay? So we were so obsessed with the computer that we named our discipline after it, okay? We call it computer science, okay? Which I don't know whose idea it was, but it was a good life. So it was a very interesting artifact. We had a good time, a very interesting time, hard problems associated with understanding the power limitations of computer and its software. But eventually, things became much more interesting. And since the 1995, as you know, we no longer study the computer. The computer is like the gadget that brought us the internet. Okay, so and really we are interested in studying the internet. Okay, and this is the next stage as I see it. All right, and the point is, there is still a huge distance between the internet and the brain. Okay, the point is that studying the internet completely transformed our field. Okay, in many ways. One is that it made it into a natural science. Okay, in the following simple way, that the internet, unlike the computer, was an artifact that nobody designed. Okay, it sort of emerged. It was an extremely complicated thing that we had to approach with the same humble curiosity, okay, and bewilderment with which biologists approach the cell, physicists approach the universe, economists approach the market, okay? So, and this, and we had to do it by their own means, which is develop new applied math, do experiments, make observations, okay? So, this, I believe, completely transformed our way of thinking, okay? So, and for many of you, this may be valuable history because you didn't see this transformation, but it exists. And the point is that once you do this, and the other, I should omit that. The other aspect, the other transformation of computer science is that the computer science became a social science, okay? Because the point of the internet is its social essence, okay? Its social nature. It is that, a long time ago, I heard a talk by a famous neuroscientist who, in a computer science conference. So it was the beginning of about 15 years ago, and he started by saying, "You are computer scientists, I'm neuroscientist. You study the internet, I studied the brain." So immediately I respected the man because he realized that we are studying the internet. Okay, but then he went to say, and I'm here to prove to you that that what I'm doing is harder because the brain is bigger than the internet, okay? And then he started slide after slide with numbers, okay? So, to prove his point. And I was sitting there looking at him and saying, what is this man talking about? Does he know that the internet is 1 billion nodes with a brain sitting in every node, okay? That's my point, okay? That the nature of the internet is unambiguously social, okay? So the computer science has become a social science, and I'm going to talk more about that. And once you are there, basically you are studying the universe, okay? I don't know, many of you, I bet that many of you had noticed before how similar the universe is to the internet, okay? They're practically indistinguishable. Okay, so, and when I say the universe, I mean things like, that computer science forays into really amazingly deep fields like statistical mechanics, quantum mechanics, statistical physics, I guess, quantum physics, of course, biology, of course, immunology, certainly the market, so the brain now. So it is the computer science has computer scientists have very successfully, I believe, informed through their understanding of computation some key scientific questions in these fields. All right, and there is little. I was not surprised by this. This is what Nick called computation as a lesson to the sciences, on the sciences. And you shouldn't be surprising that this happens. That progress often happens when you look at a scientific problem from a computational standpoint. And the reason is that many scientific objects, and certainly the models that scientists over the centuries have developed from them, for them, are replete with computational processes, okay? Underlying processes, sometimes latent computation. And so by being a computer scientist, you have an advantage in figure them out in a better way. So here is what is my plan for this lecture. I'm going to briefly mention interesting adventures in games and economics and evolution, and then I'm going to turn towards my main point, which is some very recent work on the brain. So, incidentally, the H word that I mentioned before, humility, is very, very important when you undertake a scientific endeavor. And it's because if you don't start with humility, you are certain to be humbled. Okay, so that's an advice for everybody. Okay, so let me start with something that Nick was kind enough to mention. Some work on equilibria. Incidentally, this is an equilibrium. What you see. It's an equilibrium in the following sense, that the mango would love to be at the bottom of the bowl, okay? But if nobody moves, it's not going to move, okay? So an equilibrium is when several agents have many choices, but given the current choices of the other agents, none of them has an incentive to do anything different, okay? So that's what an equilibrium is, obviously. So, it's not a familiar concept. And it's a fascinating story. It started 90 years ago when John von Neumann, disappointed by his abysmal performance at poker, decided to understand zero-sum games, okay? And started with two-player zero-sum games, and he figured, with his amazing, incisive mind, figured them out completely and proved the Max-Min theorem, one of the greatest theorems of the 20th century, in which he established that every zero-sum game between two persons has an equilibrium, okay? And the full theorem, which this one is begging, had to wait for 3 more years. And then John Nash, then a graduate student at Princeton of mathematics, proved that that's not an artifact of two players and zero-sum. All games have an equilibrium, okay, which since then has been called the Nash equilibrium, because sort of it beautifully and meaningfully generalizes Max-Min to different games, to non-zero-sum games. I don't know if you know the story, but famously, John von Neumann found, in response to a young scientist making a major discovery, chose to put it down the following way. It's just fixed points, isn't it? Okay, and that's despite the fact that 5 years before, John von Neumann had written a 700-page book, in the middle of which there was a hole in the precise shape of Nash's theorem. Okay, so you read this book, and what is missing there is Nash's theorem. Okay, so in any event, the point is that this started a fire, and economists, inspired by Nash's proof, and actually, in many ways, inspired by Nash's theorem and by its proof, they were able to prove that equilibria is a very general phenomenon in economics. For example, they solved the 75-year-old by then open problem due to due to Valras, and proved that price equilibria exist in market under assumptions. And long time later, Roger Myerson wrote that the Nash equilibrium lies at the foundations of modern economic thought. Okay, this is a very very important statement. Incidentally, this slide has 19 words, and 4 of them are Nobel Prizes. Okay, so I challenge you to do this. Okay, but what Myerson meant is that Nash's theorem, assuring us that all games have Nash equilibrium, is essentially a valuable license that all economists have when contemplating an economic situation, a social situation, to say, okay, let's see what happens at equilibrium. Okay, and they don't have to worry twice that this equilibrium may not exist. Okay, so the surprise here is that by using techniques in computer science, from computer science, complexity techniques, you can prove that finding equilibria is an intractable problem. Okay, and this is, I think this is devastating. Okay, in other words, it negates Nash's theorem in the following sense. I mean, that it makes its universality suspect. Okay, that the license to economists is revoked. Okay, it's fair to ask, but in practice, what does intractability mean? Okay, and it's fair to say that in practice, truly, it doesn't mean that much. In the following sense, that maybe we all know of honest folks who earn an honest living by solving intractable problems day in, day out. Okay, so in practice, it's true, but in theory, the point is that the Nash equilibrium is not a practical idea; it's a theoretical idea. As I told you, it is a theoretical guarantee that we can evoke the notion of the concept of Nash equilibrium as something accessible, and proving that it's not accessible, even theoretically. What I'm saying is that if Nash's theorem said that almost all games have a Nash equilibrium, I guarantee that the world in economics would be very different. Okay, so in this sense, I think that intractability is relevant to the equilibrium approach to understanding economic and its solutions. Okay, so this was a brief review of some interesting points about Nash equilibria. Let's talk a little about evolution. Okay, so I should warn you, a very clever biologist said, I guess about 60 years ago, that the amazing thing about evolution is that every scientist feels that they pretty much understand how it works. And yet so few actually do. Okay, so you know that. And he actually grumbled, some say, so few, if any, okay, understand how evolution works. And I mean, I think he was right. So here is, for starters, here is how a computer scientist could be, you look around you, and basically, here is how you could express your amazement. Okay, what is this? How did this happen? Sort of, in 10 to the 12 steps. Okay, why do I say 10 to the 12? 10 to the 12 is the number of generations since the beginning of life. Okay, And if you make the division, you'll see that most of our ancestors lived at less than 1 day. Okay? 10 to 12, if you write it on a slide, it sounds huge, but it's very little, okay? 10 to 12 is a trillion, okay? Your cell phone has done 1 trillion steps since the beginning of my talk and hasn't achieved much, okay? I hope. Okay, so, all right, so believe it or not, this is not an empty question. By the end of the talk, by the end of this part of the talk, I'm going to have an answer, okay, to propose an answer. All right, so unlike every field I know, nobody wonders how did evolution started, okay? We know how evolution started. It started with the publication of the origin of species. At Berkeley, they used to teach it at the rhetoric department, and I believe that's very, very appropriate because it is, for me, the foremost example of scientific rhetoric. Okay, if you are a scientist who wants to write convincingly, you can do much worse than reading the origin. Okay, so first of all, it's fascinating reading. I mean, once in a while, I teach a graduate course where one assignment is to read and comment on the origin. Okay, so one thing that many people don't know is that Darwin did not come up with the idea of evolution. Evolution was a ripe idea, was a mature idea by the time of Darwin. What Darwin came up with is the engine behind evolution, okay, which is natural selection. He also came up with the most bold prediction of evolution, which is common ancestry, that we all came from the same species. Okay, so if you think that evolution was done by 1859, you are completely wrong. Okay, so it was just the beginning of a long and circuitous road. First of all, genetics didn't exist at Darwin's time. Mendel came up with genetics 8 years later, and actually this remained a secret for almost 35 years. I mean, so you know how many citations this is arguably one of the 10 greatest papers in the history of science, okay? How many citations did it have in 35 years? The answer is 3, okay? And I have not read these papers, but those who have tell me that these 3 people didn't get it, okay? And probably had not read it, okay, carefully, okay? So, but the point is that by the year 1900, other people independently discovered sort of the laws of genetics. And then people looked more carefully and found out that Mendel had it. And this precipitated a crisis in evolution because the laws of genetics seem to be at loggerheads with Darwin, okay? Because Darwin's traits were continuous, Mendel proved that they are discrete. And then, there was a math theory that completely corrected this. So, it patched up, it healed the field. And I'm going to explain to you this math theory. And then there was the genomic revolution. For a long time, evolution was a theory without data, and suddenly it has too much data and it's in trouble. So, here is how this model works. Basically, the clever idea they had was to take Darwin's most important concept, which is fitness, and give it a numerical value, okay? And they say that fitness is the number of offspring that an organism is likely to produce, okay? The expected number of offspring, okay? Which is, I agree, it's a reasonable way to capture fitness. So imagine that you have a particular organism whose fitness depends on 2 genes, gene A and gene B, and each one has 3 alleles, 3 variants, And these are the numbers that are its fitness, okay? And imagine that it starts from equally, the uniform distribution. Then the point is that in one generation, the numbers will change, okay? And they will change in a particular way that if you sit down, sort of, it's a fair exercise for a beginning course in population genetics. You just write down what will happen. There is going to be a recombination. So if the upper right and the upper left people mate together, then 4 genotypes are possible. Sort of, the 4 corners with equal probability. And from that, you get your new numbers. And so it's a simple difference equation, simple discrete dynamical system. And from this, you can predict what will happen. So this is the basic mathematical model in population genetics that has been sort of, at the heart of quantitative approaches to evolution. And it's hard to believe, but 100 years later, some of the most interesting questions are still mysteries, okay? Why so much genetic diversity, okay? It turns out that if you measure the diversity, and now you find that it's an order of magnitude bigger than the theory predicts. What is the role of sex, of recombination? And an ancient question, that has always puzzled mathematicians: is evolution optimizing something? Okay, and people have been, a lot of famous mathematical biologists have been trying to answer this question. By the way, look at these numbers. What do you think will happen? I showed you what happens after 1 generation. What will happen after 100 generations later? And place your bets. Here's what happens 100 generations later. 100 generations later, the most fit genotype, which is the upper left, is going to lose, okay? Despite the fact that it's most fit. And here is why. The reason is that with sex, with recombination, what matters is not, it's not the biggest number in the matrix. It's the heaviest row and the heaviest column on the average, okay? In other words, good mixers win. Alleles that have good ways to collaborate with other alleles, these are the ones who are going to win. Okay, at least in the short term. And of course, in contrast, in a sexual species, the fittest genotype will survive. Okay, so that's the basic difference between sex and asex. Okay, that sex basically favors mixers. Okay. Incidentally, so let me go over this. Incidentally, at this point, I wanted, one thing that I was discussing with students before coming here is genetic algorithms. Okay, and this is, I have been very interested in genetic algorithms, and one of the reasons why I thought I had to study evolution is I wanted to understand why genetic algorithms don't perform better. Okay, why have deep nets humbled, humiliated genetic algorithms? Okay, and I think I have an answer, and bear with me. But here, what I want to tell you is that there is, one thing that we discovered to our surprise is a very informative new way to look at evolution of a population, okay, between mutations, as a game, okay, and as an algorithm. So here is what I'm telling you. That if you look at the mathematics of these equations carefully, and you do some algebra, not something deep. I mean, these are equations that have been trodden for 100 years exhaustively, okay? So it was amazing to me that this elementary fact was waiting for us so close to the surface. So this model is mathematically equivalent to a repeated game between genes. So if you think, how should I think about the evolution of a particular population? It turns out you should think of it as the genes of the organism sitting around the table and playing a game, okay? The repetitions are the generations. So every generation, they play. The strategies for every gene, because the players are genes, right, are the alleles of the genes, the variants of the gene. The probabilities of play are precisely the frequencies with which the variants appear in the population. The common utility, because this is not an antagonistic game, it's not an adversarial game. It's a cooperative game. Okay, it is a coordination game, and they have one utility, and the utility is precisely the organism's fitness. Okay, so it's not the selfish gene metaphor of Dawkins. Okay, it's the opposite. All right, and the question is now, what algorithm do the genes use to update their how do you call it, their strategies from one generation to the next? And the amazing answer here is that they use an algorithm that is well known to computer scientists, and that's multiplicative weight update. Okay, so this is sort of came as, my co-author Umesh Vazirani. When we made this observation, we went for a glass of wine, and he confided in me, now I have confidence in evolution. So it's a simple common sense algorithm which is known by computer scientists to be able to solve problems that it didn't have the right to solve. Okay, and it basically says that at each step increase the weight of allele I by a factor which is precisely which is a simple increasing function of its fitness, and essentially its mixability, as we put it there. But it gets even more interesting. If you take this algorithm, okay, and you try to reverse engineer it and say, okay, these genes are optimizing something. Find me the function that they're optimizing. What you find is this function. Okay? So this is the function that every gene wants to optimize. And the function is essentially a fitness, a strange variant of fitness, and it has a regularizer that is the entropy. Okay, so basically, what the genes seem to be trying to do here is they are eager to increase fitness, but they don't want to give up in diversity. Okay, so they don't want to go all in. All right, and this is obviously a clever strategy on this planet because conditions change. Okay, and okay, after this short tour, let's remember the big question, sort of, and I think we have earned through computer science an insight in each one of these. Okay, so finally, let me get to the point. Okay, and this is joint work with my friends Wolfgang Maass and Santosh Vempala. Okay, so obviously, brain and computation are very related. Okay, so and this is what I'm going to talk about. But really, they're not. Okay, so babies do amazing things, computers do amazing things, but there is no intersection, right? We come up in computer science with great, clever algorithms, and when we can't, we prove the problems, NP-complete, and yet the brain solves them sort of, in a completely different way that is mysterious. Here is another important disconnect which basically motivates this talk, that there have been leaps in neuroscience the past 15, 20 years. We increase exponentially. There is a deluge of new data, new experimental data about brain anatomy, function, and so on, and all that. And still, no overarching understanding seems to be emerging. Okay, so the point is that the basic question is, first of all, the basic question is, how does the mind emerge from the brain, right? I mean, this is what we're talking about. How the brain gives rise to the mind. There are many reasons to believe, including testimonials, that computer scientists should work on this problem. Okay, and yet there is no easy path for computer science to work on this problem. How does one think computation about this brain? In the earlier days, it was easy, okay, because we knew nothing about the brain, okay. So Turing and von Neumann are two amazing thinkers who thought very, very much about the brain, okay. But later, 40 years later, Les Valiant thought about the brain. I'm going to talk a little about his work. Basically, first of all, he was the first to say, in my experience, that the computational theory of brain is both possible and essential. And he came up with the neuroidal model and Wistner algorithms, which I'm not going to describe, but basically they were automata-like algorithms that were modeling how neurons work, okay? How populations of neurons work. A great contribution was in 1980. David Marr is one of the founders of modern neuroscience, of computational neuroscience, and he's a Turing-like figure, who placed the seeds in almost everything that is computational neuroscience in his brief life. He was my colleague at MIT when he died in 1980. Posthumously, he published a paper which was a call to arms to computer scientists. They say, here is how we should study the brain. And he has the 3 steps method, which I'm going to refer to. I think it's as relevant as ever. He called them differently. He said algorithm, software, and hardware, but I call them specs, algorithm, and hardware because this corresponds to today's nomenclature. So basically, first of all, you have to understand, in order to study a system of the brain, you have to understand, first of all, what is its input-output specification, what it's trying to achieve. Then you have to start. Then third step is to understand what hardware it uses to achieve that, and then you have to understand what representations and what methods it uses to achieve that, okay? The software. Cool. Should we use his framework to identify, to study the algorithm that run by the brain, okay? I think that David Marr himself, he would laugh at this proposal, okay? Because when he proposed this 3-step method, he was expecting fully that there are tens of thousands of algorithms running in the brain, and there are hundreds of systems. And what he was proposing is to use his method in a patient case-by-case quest for understanding the multitude of algorithms that run in the brain. Okay, so that the algorithms run by the brain are going for many computer scientists who like nice abstractions. I think they are going to find them disappointingly diverse. So here is So here is what I propose to do. To develop a computational theory, of course, the way Marr and Valiant asked us to, are urging us to, but we want it to be absolutely compatible with what is known about the brain. Okay. Second, we should start by declaring defeat. Okay, by saying we are not going to find one algorithm. In some cases, we're not going to find an algorithm at all. Okay, because what is happening in the brain is basically the result of long coevolution between a task and the neural system. But we should still try to find whatever rudimentary algorithm we can and hardware on a case-by-case basis. And what we're proposing is I don't know the more old-timers among you may remember, it was that used to be a huge dichotomy in computer science, in artificial intelligence. Symbolic versus sub-symbolic. Sub-symbolic sometimes meant connectionist or neural networks. And symbolic meant the rest of artificial intelligence, okay? So it turns out that there is a symbolic, sub-symbolic boundary, I think, in the brain, in the way brain operates. And we should start as close to the boundaries as possible and walk towards the symbolic one. As one candidate is study assemblies of excitatory neurons in the medial temporal lobe, which is an area in the brain where people believe that memory resides. Okay, so a very interesting form of memory resides. Okay, so let me start with a recent experiment by a group at UCLA, and sort of this is I hope you'll be fascinated by this experiment because this is what motivates me. All right, so it's a human experiment. They have 24 subjects and a few hundred neurons. But let's focus on one subject and one neuron, okay? And because that's a better way to describe it. And basically, what they do is they show to this subject 100 pictures, and it turns out that consistently, day after day, this neuron lights up every time the Eiffel Tower is shown, okay? And only then, okay? So you show the Eiffel Tower, the neuron lights up. You show the Forbidden City, nothing. You show the Eiffel Tower, lights up, okay? You show his brother, doesn't light up. And then you do the following, okay? You Photoshop his brother in front of the Eiffel Tower, okay? And you do it better than I did here, okay? All right, and then of course the neuron sees Eiffel Tower and lights up, okay? Then you show Eiffel Tower, of course it lights up. Then you show the Forbidden City, nothing. Then you show the brother, the neuron lights up. Get it? I'm really watery-eyed when you see what happened? The guy has learned that his brother has been to Eiffel Tower. And you watched it. You watched this person learn something. Okay, everybody with me? Okay, so I want to explain this. I want to have a theory that explains this. Okay, so the challenge is, these are the specs. We have the specs now, okay? What is the hardware? What is the algorithm? Is it clear? So let's start. So speculation about the hardware, okay? We conjecture that each memory, like Eiffel Tower, brother, Forbidden City, is represented by an assembly, which means a set of many neurons. When I say many, I mean tens of thousands. Okay? And when you first see the Eiffel Tower, okay, this assembly is formed, okay, is being consolidated, okay, and being stabilized somehow. And then every time you see the Eiffel Tower next, okay, so it remembers it, so it lights up. Well, almost all of them fire, okay? Maybe some of them are lost, okay? And maybe some new ones get into the game, all right? But more or less, all of them fire. And more importantly, if two stimuli, like the brother and the Eiffel Tower, happen together, okay? These two memories can be associated, okay? The person can learn that these two memories have something in common. They are associates, okay? And how do they get associated? And our conjecture is that they do it if they are like this, or they do it by creeping towards each other and sort of then bleeding into each other, okay? So if there was the Eiffel Tower and this was the brother, okay, this neuron here, okay, became a brother neuron, okay, as well as an Eiffel Tower neuron, okay? Is this clear? They acquire an intersection. So this is our hypothesis, all right? So the question is, how do you verify such a hypothesis, right? So what's the algorithm? How are they, how are they formed? How are they called? How does association happen? So here is how. Here is how we believe that memories are formed. That this is an assembly that already exists at the highest. This is actually there are works in olfaction, like by Franks and Axel, that point to a similar situation where you have a lot of you have a lot of neurons that are firing in particular in the olfactory bulb in this case, and they are projected into a place in that case in the piriform cortex, but in the MTL, and basically they fire again and again until this assembly in the MTL is formed, and I have to depict them as areas, but they're not areas, okay? You understand, they're scattered all over, right? There is no geometric view here, right? These things are random neurons everywhere, okay? And how does this happen? How does this miraculous emergence of this assembly happen? It seems to me that the only way that it can happen is because there are synapses projecting from the sensory cortex to MTL, and these synapses, by firing, create some neurons to fire to have higher potential than the others, and these are finally selected. They fire again and again and again, and as we are going to see, they become extremely stable in there. And the reason for this is something called plasticity, which in its simplest form is what Hebb said 70 years ago, that if two neurons fire together, and they have a synapse in common, then the synapse says something is happening here, okay? So it's increasing its strength, okay? It's increasing strength, but perhaps by a small factor and up to a limit. But this is what is believed that in a very simplified way that is happening in synapses, and this way, the cells of the assembly will have strong connections between them. Okay, and this will enhance stability, because this means that if some of them will fire, then the rest of them are likely to fire because there is strong connections between them. Okay, and as we're going to see, the connections are going to be even stronger than otherwise. And in some sense, this is also in some sense this all follows from very elementary random graph theory. Okay, where you can think of this as G and P, if you know what I mean, and the probability P that a particular nodes are joined by an edge is, in this particular case, in MTL, seems to be something like 1%. Okay, neurons have about 1% probability of being connected. The question is, how about associations? Okay, so let me tell you what I think happens with associations. If you have two assemblies in the visual cortex, let's say in the olfactory cortex, and let's say brother and Eiffel Tower, and there are two associated assemblies, and these guys fire, okay, then what will happen is that if they fire enough, they will somehow cause, and this is still, I'm not claiming, I'm explaining it, okay, so, but that's a conjecture, okay? I believe that this causes sort of, these things to come closer together, okay? And the question is how, all right? Okay, so how does one verify such a theory, okay? So one is by simulations, okay? So, and it turns out that this genesis of formation and persistence of assemblies and association, their association has been verified by in artificial neural networks. Okay, so our group has verified it. Furthermore, we have, there is a simple mathematical model in which we can show that the dynamics of the stimulus firing and projecting on a population of neurons very quickly, linearly converges to the formation of a stable assembly. And very interestingly, the assembly cells are sampled from an interesting distribution, which is exactly what the paper of Franks and Axel 6 years ago predicted, which is in order, there is a sum of two distributions: the uniform, it's a convex combination of the uniform distribution and the projection distribution of the stimulus. In other words, the ones that are preferentially attached to the stimulus have higher probability, but the others do not have zero probability, okay? They have some probability. And in other words, the stimulus will recruit some neurons to be parts of the assembly, and these neurons will be the ones that have richest connections to the stimulus, and a few others that happen to be intermediately connected by those other neurons. And how about associations? It turns out that when it comes to association, random graph theory does not seem to suffice, and we need to go a little further. And here is how further we have to go. There is an evocative paper from 11 years back, and unfortunately I have not seen many sequels, where basically what they say is the following. Basically what they did is they unfortunately, they didn't work on the MTL. They worked on layer 5 neurons on the visual cortex. But what they found there is that neural networks, the random graph of synapses, has some interesting deviations from randomness, and that's the following: that in their case, if neuron A is connected to neuron B, the probability is very, very small, let's say 1 in 1,000. But if there is this synapse, the probability that there is the synapse in the opposite direction jumps from 0 to 10%. Okay, so it's much more likely. And very importantly for associations, Song et al. Also say that if A is connected to B, given that A is connected to B, and A has a synapse to C, there must be, it's about an order of magnitude more likely than without this, than the null hypothesis, that there is going to be a synapse between B and C. And it is this last last deviation from randomness that can help explain the formation, the association. How do these things get together and acquire an intersection? And this is through elementary combinatorics. Okay, so basically, it turns out that since the Eiffel Tower shines on both the Eiffel Tower memory and the brother memory, okay, there is going to be, by the birthday paradox, there's going to be one neuron in the Eiffel Tower in the sensory cortex that has a connection to both the brother and the Eiffel Tower assembly, and as a result, there is likely very heavy connection between these two neurons, and as a result, there is much heavier than random graph theory would predict connection between these two populations, and as a result, it's much more likely that the firing of the Eiffel Tower neuron will light up some neurons in the brother assembly. I don't want to confuse you any further, but there is another interesting operation, which I'm going to refer to, and this is the operation bind. Okay, so I think that forming assemblies and associating assemblies together is sort of is the beginning of a calculus for understanding sort of memory in the medial temporal lobe. And I think that there is another one that is extremely important, and that's bind. For example, it will be eventually important for a child to understand that give is a verb. Okay, and such an association is not between assemblies; it's between an assembly and a brain area. Okay, so some brain area that is devoted to verbs, and this is, we call this a pointer assembly, which is a surrogate for give, which is formed within the verb area. And this hypothesis is also supported by simulations by our group, led by Robert Legenstein at Graz. Incidentally, for the die-hard theoreticians, there is a very interesting theory problem that we came across in the same having to do with association. Basically, it's association graphs. Imagine that I give you this graph, okay, which there are nodes. Maybe the nodes are in sort of Forbidden City, Eiffel Tower, Brother, and so on. Okay, and I'm asking you, and basically I have weights in the assemblies, which basically tell me how much do these on the edges, which might say how much do these two assemblies intersect, okay, by what percentage? And I'm asking you, can you draw a Venn diagram for which the weights, the intersections are precisely this, okay? And it turns out this is a surprising complicated problem. And if you try to attack it through mathematical programming, you get very quickly to something that Grothendieck has worked on, and that's the cut norm of graphs, okay? And we have approximation algorithms for it, intractability results, and so on. So I guess my point is that if you are a die-hard theoretician, sort of, with little interested in actual brain, don't worry, there is a lot of work for you here also. Okay, so my real ambition in this, okay, is not to show neuroscientists how memory works. Okay, so that would be lovely. Is to mobilize computer scientists to show them that there is a path despite all evidence. Okay, they can get into this field, into this research field, without reading 3,000-page books. Okay, so I'm coming close to the end of my talk. So again, bird's eye view, okay, 10,000 miles up. Our brain would sort of do nothing interesting if it's put in a boring planet, okay? So, our environment is very important, okay? The environment is extremely important. And so you cannot study the brain without understanding the environment. And studying the environment is very difficult. Studying the brain vis-a-vis the environment is very difficult because the brain affects the environment, okay? So, in the short term, via motor and motion, in the long term via construction, design, and so on. Okay, but the point is that we have an environment which we understand very well. Okay, and that's language. Language is an environment. Why is it an environment? Because it is the input to a very important function of the brain. Okay. And the point is that this environment was designed by us and evolved just 2,000 generations ago. Okay, in the last 2,000 generations, which is an amazingly short time. In some sense, the language is a last-minute adaptation of our brain. Okay, when language started, our brain was almost exactly as it is now. And one tempting hypothesis is that it has evolved because language has undergone incredible evolution. So, witness Greek and Chinese, okay? And it evolved cognizant of the brain strengths, okay? So, you cannot, you can do worse if you want to study the brain, understand the brain, okay, so you can do worse than studying language, okay, so because language is something that I think in secret ways remaining to be discovered reflects the brain, okay. For example, language was obviously was optimized so that babies can learn it, okay, if you look deeper into language, there is a beautiful book by Chomsky, by Berwick and Chomsky, that just came out. According to Chomsky, knowledge to language is conterminous with grammar. Okay, grammar is by definition what knowledge of language means, and Chomsky believes that some grammatical knowledge predated birth. Okay, but how much? So, it changes over the decades, okay? And right now it's very restricted, and I restrict it even more. I propose that the only grammar that we need is this rule that I have there. And basically it says that a linguistic unit, a sentence, essentially talks about somebody or something doing or being something. Okay? And that's all. Okay? In other words, that a language is in some sense a license to treat these two things as one. Okay? And there is a recursion there because the something that you can be a sentence. Okay? The main point, I think, of Berwick and Chomsky is that language in this form could have existed long before language was done for communication. They hypothesize that language has evolved hundreds of years before, because that language as communication, as vocalization, is almost an afterthought. Okay, that happened very recently, and that. Language as linking together in a recursive manner a lot of things, so that you can make plans, you can do stories, you can run simulations in your mind, in your brain, evolved way before that, and gave enough advantage to the few people who could do it that they conquered all of Africa. Okay, and then vocalization came, and the rest is history. Okay. Okay. All right. So, association and binding, the two operations I talked about, seem ideally fitted to learning and generating grammar. Okay, and I'll just okay, my PowerPoint, Microsoft is begging your pardon because the PowerPoint crashed. This is not supposed to happen. But what I wanted is to show you, wrong. Is to is to show you this, no talk about the brain should be without a picture of the brain. And this is a very interesting picture from the books and from a paper by a European researcher, Federici. And basically, look at the purple and the purple and blue pathways, right? I mean, these are neural pathways that connect regions of the brain that are supposed to be related to vocabulary, to nouns especially, and verbs, to up to regions of the brain where syntax is supposed to reside, like Broca's area. What I find particularly fascinating is the finding by Federici that these pathways become myelinated, which means they become ready for action during the second half of the second year of the baby's life. Okay, exactly when syntax kicks in. Okay, when grammar kicks in, when the child learns grammar. Okay, so I find this as very very evocative. I gave you a few examples of where computation acts as scientific inspiration, source of scientific inspiration, the world outlook. Okay, equilibria may be less universal than we thought. That evolution has a very interesting algorithmic rendering, and assemblies may be one answer to the question, how does one think computational about the brain? And in fact, may be one answer that is more amenable for more computer scientists to be involved. And ultimately, we should not forget language. So, thank you very much. Now you can use your microphone. You can use your buttons for the microphones. Yes, sir. Sir. No.
Hi.
Hello.
So thanks a lot for the talk. towards the end, you talked about the language, and also in between, you were talking about the brain outside of this environment is nothing. I was wondering, in the approach to understand this, understanding the mind and how it arises from brain, is this idea of spending lots of time on the connections and the physiology of the brain is more important? I mean, not more important. It's going to take us. Is a better approach to take, or looking more in the interactions of concepts and the language and the sentences that you were talking? Like imagining, like as studying the cloud of concepts, that the brain is just the hardware that relays those information.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I have learned the hard way that it is very dangerous not to take into account everything that is known in neuroscience about what we are studying. Okay, so you know so I mean, knowing as much as you can about neurons and synapses and fMRI experiments is of fundamental importance. Of course, you have to let your imagination and computational experience soar, and hopefully therein will be progress. So I mean, I know that was a timid answer to your question, but I mean, I think both of the two elements are essential.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question back here. I'm just wondering, since you've been talking about memory, just back here, I wonder if you can comment on how you see the role of the hippocampus in your model, and how recollection, we know that memory, once it's recalled, it's actually kind of written back into the brain. In fact, there are even compounds that can stop that process of writing back the memory.
So I didn't explain what I meant by MTL. MTL contains the hippocampus. Okay, so the hippocampus, of course, is at the focus of. Yes, I should have mentioned that. It's at the MTL is a brain region that is around the hippocampus, and it is believed to be implicated in memory. And of course, the hippocampus is paramount. Is where memories live. Is where stories exist. You know, where episodic memory lives, and so on. So I mean, there is no contention between what I'm saying and what you are proposing.
I'm just wondering how you see the sort of function. What function do you see from your theory that might be localized within the hippocampus versus the assemblies that you're talking about? In
the neuron that I showed you in the experiment could be from the hippocampus. Okay, the assemblies that I'm talking about, I'm not ready to localize them more precisely, but they could include the hippocampus. Okay. I know that in the experiment in the Ison et al. Experiment, they certainly monitored a lot of neurons from the hippocampus and from surrounding areas. That's what I meant by MTL. There was another question. Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering, during we talked about associations, we talked about memories, and they're having some kind of intersection of relatedness between the memories. I was wondering, is there any way to determine like the weights, like on the graph, like between the two nodes? Is it through empirical or like theoretical knowledge as to how they are related?
So the same group has made more experiments where it's becoming a little less. I mean, in the beginning, from the first experiments, what you could roughly calculate is that about 40% of the assemblies intersect. Later figures for more rigorous experiments suggest that around 10%. I suspect that if you show many times the same things together, they're going to come closer and closer.
So I would imagine that things like analogies, how people make analogies, would be how like weights are getting close, like higher and higher between the two.
So it's funny you mention analogies. I mean, many people believe that if you understand how analogies work, so you understand a lot about human intelligence. I mean, I think analogies are a few steps away from what we're doing. I mean, but I agree that analogies are should be very central. I mean, as central as language in our thinking.
Okay, thank you very much for the talk. I really enjoyed. I have a more general question. So the first few slides you had, it reminded me of a book I've been reading. It's called Seventh Sense, which says in order to understand the world, you should analyze everything as fully connected to the network. So I want to run an analogy between human brain, computers, and the universe. So you explained that over time, there has been like 1 trillion generations, but only 2,000 generations where we had language, which I consider like connectivity between the brains. And then we invented computer. In the first round, you had those years there, and then internet connected the computers to each other. And now we have been single planet species as humans, but now discussions is that we should be multi-planet, so we should be connecting. So if you can kind of comment on that, is there similarities between those? And also a related question, if universe is like internet, then how gravity? What is the analogy of the gravity on the internet? I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, so are there analogies? Okay, I firmly believe that making useful analogies is the hallmark and signature of human intelligence. But the burden is on the word useful. Okay, I have to think about your question to find the usefulness of the analogies you propose. Sorry, your second question was about. Yes. Okay. What is the analogy of what is gravity for the internet? Okay. The gravity created the universe and is holding it together. What created the internet? What's holding it together? Good question. Can I go to literature for a moment? Okay, so there is a beautiful book by José Saramago called Baltasar and Brismunda. I wish everybody reads it. It's an amazing love story that has to do with the human condition, as a few others. So, in any event, Saramago won the Nobel Prize a couple of decades ago. So, one of his heroes is trying to have a flying machine, flying machine. And when he's asked what is going to be the thing that is going to hold it together, to create and hold it together, his answer is the same as my answer to your question. That's the will of man.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
had a question about you. You talked about the merge between S going to a verb phrase or a noun phrase as being important.
No, I didn't say it's important. I meant to say that this is the only grammar that exists. I made the radical statement that would anger Chomsky.
So that, like, you're saying that's the only grammar that everything starts from?
That it's the only grammar that matters. It's only the only grammar that's ingrained in the brain.
So basically, that's the ability to associate a language phrase with an
actor, and an action.
Both,
yes.
Like the combination of them both.
Right. So basically, it says that that we are interested in actors doing or being things, and these are, you can consider them as one. And as part of them, they can have parts of the same structure, okay, recursively. That this is sort of, I believe, the essence of grammar, okay? I believe linguists believe this now, that the merge is sort of, is what is needed for language. And, but more fundamentally, I think that this is the basic idea in language, okay? So that you can put things together, and as a result, in a recursive way, and as a result, you can create stories, plans, simulations, narratives.
Is it just the recursiveness, or is it also the fact of being able to associate have your actor do something or be something? Is it both of those properties, or just recursiveness?
I mean, the recursiveness makes it unbounded, and that's important. But I mean, this dual thing of somebody doing something, so I think is extremely important. By the way, in some languages, who is doing something comes second. Okay, so what I'm saying is that either that or it's reverse. So is what I mean by the basic merge. Commutative. Yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering if you think that humans are purely information processing systems, or if you think that there is some part of us that could not be replicated with or in terms of information.
Good God, why do you have to ask that? Okay. You are not asking if we have a soul, do you? I mean, I could easily give go both ways, but this will not affect the fact that I believe that humans are lovely and amazing. Okay, inimitable. Okay, and now could you simulate humans? Well enough to fool all other humans. I don't know. Okay, I've been asked all these questions, many times. Will humans ever be defeated in Go? And I lost every time. Okay, I'm willing to say absolutely not. Okay, okay, let's not forget, that whatever happens, okay, it's going to be a nice interaction between humans, okay, also, right? I mean, and another achievement of humans. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask about, I've heard about this thing called deep learning, and they're trying to use it to make a translation, that a German sentence would be the same as an English sentence. And is that anything like language, or is it totally the opposite?
Okay. I mean, is flight by airplanes a flight? I mean, it is, right? I mean, so it, in some sense, it's the opposite. I mean, they don't flap, okay? But okay. Every time that a computer system will achieve something, or a mechanical device like an airplane will achieve something, it will seem like a deviation from the original question and cheating. Okay, this does not diminish its how impressive the feat is. Okay, because I mean, these things can translate from German to English. Okay, so and they can translate better than me. Okay, and I've spent 6 years of my life learning German. Okay, and so you have to tip your hat to them. You know what I'm saying? And of course, you also have to fight the you have to fight the urge inside to say, okay, they're invincible. They're going to do everything. Okay, so because they're not. Okay, but you have to salute every achievement. I think, right? And deep down knowing that it is cheating. Okay, so that it does evade the original question. Sorry, you had a question.
You showed on the slide there is a connection between memory about the brother and the Eiffel Tower, but what if we try to insert something that person haven't seen before and try to fire this neuron or whatever by placing this information with something that person already had seen?
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to influence person's mind by that?
I think so. Yeah. Good question. One of the mysteries in vision is something called invariance. Okay, for example, if I see Nick this way, okay, if I see him this way, if I see him this way, okay, so these are every zoom in, zoom out, every projection is completely, as images, they have nothing in common, right? And yet in my brain, there is the same assembly fires, right? And the same when I see the string NICK, okay? How is this achieved, okay? And I believe it's achieved this way, okay? So I believe that this merge thing, is that by repeatedly showing together, basically you make them coincide, right? In the end, and this and that's you achieve invariance. Okay, could be. Okay, it could be that it's a similar mechanism, right? And of course it can, everything we learn about the brain can be used against us. Okay, so we have to, everything we learn can be used against us. Sir.
In the pursuit for general artificial intelligence, do you think that better simulation of the brain, like more advanced neural networks, is the way to do research? Like, is that the path to the next big breakthrough? Or is it going to be not with stimulating the human brain, like with going in some other path?
Yeah. You are asking a truly fundamental and ancient question, right? And there have been artificial intelligence researchers who went both ways, and the best have gone on both ways. I think that the success of neural nets has very little to do with the brain. Okay, because neural nets are completely different from the brain. Okay, so there is no brain researcher or neural nets researcher that believes otherwise, I think. Okay, but I think they have a subliminal connection, okay? In the sense that the fuel, the motivation, the impetus for this dedicated community of researchers to persist through all these failures for decades until the final success, this motivation came from the brain, came from their original motivation to understand the brain. Okay, so in this sense, the brain is implicated, to the success of neural nets. Okay, but will it be a good advisor for artificial intelligence? I don't think so. The brain has its own architecture that, incidentally, I showed von Neumann's picture. He has written an amazing short book, short essay, about computers and the brain. And nobody has dissected the brain's architecture better than von Neumann. Okay, so it's really required reading for anybody who is interested in both subjects.
What book was this?
It's called Computers and the Brain,
Thanks.
by von Neumann. It's a short book. It's great book.
Going back to the brother and Eiffel Tower, is it true, would that same result hold if it was two semantic memories, or does it necessarily have to be an episode?
I have no way of knowing. This experiment had been successfully done in monkeys with what you would call semantic memories. In other words, some horizontal and some vertical patterns, and so on. So this it has happened. We have evidence that it can happen with with abstract concepts, like patterns in monkeys. So there is some evidence of that. Yeah. Oh, I thought you were a point. I was looking.
Let's see. Okay, so I have a question about academic trajectories. So, suppose many of us are convinced that studying the brain will lead to important breakthroughs in computer science in 20 years from now. Then, what can we do to march down that path, to prepare ourselves for that? So, and maybe we could think by analogy to computational biology, right, which was another field that was sort of invaded by computer scientists. So how can we sort of build up the infrastructure around computational biology that now exists, but now for the brain instead?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So, if you look at the path of computational biology, it was sort of easier, okay? Not because molecular biology is any easier than neuroscience, okay? But because there were a lot of entry points, okay? So, a lot of urgent questions, like sequence alignment, right? And so on, that invited a lot of computer scientists to work on this. And slowly, by osmosis, they learned enough biology to do the next. It's no coincidence that Gene Myers, the person who came up with sequence alignment, BLAST, was the same who came up 10 years later with shotgun sequencing. Okay, so what I'm saying is that, which is a brilliant, really core biology, genomics idea. So there were a lot of quick entry points. Okay. So with the brain, I believe reading neuroscience is a harder undertaking than reading molecular biology. Not much, but I believe it's harder. And also, there are no clear entry points. Okay, one of my motivations is to try to create one such entry point. Okay, so that, and I believe that these assembly-based memories, could be an interesting entry point for us. Another very interesting entry point, I think, is a subject that I will not have the time to talk about, but they're called grid cells. Look them up, okay? Grid cells. Okay? Yes. Marr.
That's loud.
Okay.
Hi. I'm loud anyways, so I don't know why it's echoing. So lots of, we're in a computer science department, lots of people work on big systems, and one thing you've emphasized is that there may be tons of different algorithms working at the same time in the brain. But at the end of the day, the brain is super connected even across these different systems. So do you have any thoughts on how these different systems and algorithms communicate with each other?
We know that it's 2.5 years ago there was a special issue of Science called the title was Connections. It was about connections to the brain, and basically the whole point was that the brain is extremely like the internet, okay, and there are power laws everywhere, there are small communities everywhere. There are deviations from randomness everywhere, and there is a backbone, okay? So by this I mean that there are very efficient connections between between essentially all the systems. And so that this much we know. Don't forget that both the internet and the brain evolved, okay? But probably the brain evolved a little less, even less designed than the internet, okay? If anybody here has any doubts that the brain evolved, okay? Notice that our eyes are here and the visual cortex is here, okay? That's stupid, all right? Okay, there are historical accidents like that, okay? So that made this need for backbone more acute. But it's I believe it's it's sort of uncontroversial that it's there. Yes.
Oh yeah. So along the lines of that question, so do you think the same approach that you have of like having the specs and the algorithm and the hardware would work for studying like higher level connections between the smaller algorithms? So like the higher level controls that connect all the algorithms. Because I feel like right now, there's been like a lot of theory, but it's very difficult, right, to have a systematic way of getting to the higher level controls.
Yeah.
I'm wondering.
You mean about the brain?
Yeah, about the brain. So.
Yeah. So you're right. In some sense, the basic architecture had been known for a long time, right? That what happens is that the input senses, they are processed, then the results are either discarded or stored, and then decisions are made and actuators are moved. Okay. So this basic architecture we know. Okay, we don't know how it happens, but we know that it exists. Okay, so and there are and then there are a lot of mysteries. Okay, how the thalamus controls all these things, how memories are. This is the thing where incidentally what I talked about is right after the processing. Okay, so what happens after the processing, after we have the holistic Eiffel Tower somewhere, what happens to it after that. Okay, I think that understanding, in more detail the top-level architecture will be as difficult as understanding the individual algorithms. I mean, because the high-level architecture is itself a brain system that needs to be done, by, I believe by the 3 steps, okay? So, how, incidentally, people now put a 4th step, which, is more overarching, that learning, okay? So, it's, how this system is designed to be able to modify it by experience. Okay, so, that's supposed to be another level of our computational understanding of the brain. Sir.
Dr. John von Neumann. Another of his accomplishments from 1954, I think it was the parametron model of computation, where you have pulse trains, and through inductance capacitance switching, it was actually used for computation until transistor logic was just so much faster. And do you see that as analogous to pulse trains from neurons, where it's not just a firing or not, or an assembly having an association or not, that there's a bit of pulse interval encoding, and the combinations of encodings. I think the term is the devil's staircase, where 1-to-1 ratio, 2-to-1 ratio, 1-to-3, 2-to-3, the small integer ratios of encodings are serve as reinforcements, which is the next step of the parametron model. So are you also looking at that mechanism, or do you think it's unimportant? What are your thoughts?
I have, I'll be very frank. I did not, I consider myself a biographer of von Neumann, but I did not know about this writing of his. Okay, so I'm ashamed. Okay, so I'll look it up. Thank you. Thank you.